Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at John chapter 18. Jesus has finished his Last Supper with his disciples. He's prepared them with everything they need to know, and his time is up. As plots to sabotage Jesus are thrown into the open, Jesus shows his absolute sovereignty over it all, while also clearly and plainly submitting to their sabotage, and more importantly, to the will of the Father. He is the King. He is the I Am. And yet his rule and his reign looks completely different than that of the priests or of the Romans. He shows his great power and his great strength by taking all of the evil in the world and bearing it in his body, on his shoulders. And then he dies with it, ratifying God's judgment on the sin of the world. And he's completely confident the whole time that God will raise him once again, precisely because of his complete submission. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went forth with his disciples over the ravine of the Kidron, where there was a garden, in which he entered with his disciples. Now Judas also, who was betraying him, knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. After that Last Supper, Jesus takes his disciples to a garden just outside of the city. The fact that it's a garden mirrors Genesis 2's Garden of Eden, representing the new creation that's breaking through because of Jesus' death and resurrection. Meanwhile, John also mentions that they crossed the Kidron River to get there. It's a brook east of Jerusalem that is often associated with David and his descendants in the Old Testament. This reflects Jesus' kingship and messiahship as the chosen one of David's line. But also Jesus intentionally chooses this spot because he knows it's a place where Judas will come looking for him. And not Judas alone, but armed guards and officials from both the Roman army and from the Pharisees and priests. The only thing that would ever unite these natural enemies is their hatred for Jesus. So Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered, "Jesus, the Nazarene." He said to them, "I am he." And Judas also, who was betraying him, was standing with them. So when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Jesus asks this militia who they're seeking, and they say, "Jesus from Nazareth." And in response, Jesus says, "I am he," which causes the whole mob to fall to the ground. He's once again using the personal name of God, the great I Am, Yahweh, and applying it to himself. After his 7 I Am metaphors and his statement about before Abraham was born, I am, from John 8, Jesus is making it clear that he is unified with the Father. He is the God of the Old Testament tabernacled in human flesh. And briefly, he shows his true power when the entire horde falls at only a word. Remember that Jesus is the Word of God incarnate, according to John 1. It's reminiscent of Philippians 2's statement about how God has given Jesus the name that's above every other name, and how at the name of Jesus, one day, every knee will bow. But that day isn't today. Therefore he again asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way. To fulfill the word which he spoke, of those whom you have given me, I lost not one." Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it, and struck the high priest's slave, and cut off his right ear. And the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put the sword into the sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Jesus lets his disciples and the Romans and the Pharisees see a glimpse of his true nature as the Yahweh God, the I Am who I am. And then he shows that he is choosing to submit to death. He does it so that his disciples will not also be arrested and killed, fulfilling what Jesus said about not losing any of his disciples in the high priestly prayer from the last chapter. This also makes us think about what Jesus said in John 15, about how laying down one's life for one's friends is the greatest love of all. Indeed, Jesus has a great power to be able to fight back against these, and yet he shows a greater power, a greater love in submitting to them. Now, Peter does not understand this concept at all. After all, he said he would follow Jesus to death in John 13. He rushes in to defend Jesus' honor, even attacking a servant of the high priest. And this is a position we can so often find ourselves in, bashing and attacking other people in order to defend Jesus, neglecting his commands to love our neighbor. Jesus is resolute in yielding to the Father's will, and he rebukes Peter. His reference to the cup comes from passages like Psalm 75, Isaiah 51, and Jeremiah 25, wherein God's judgment on the world is likened to a cup of wine that the wicked are forced to drink. Think about Exodus 32, where Moses made the Israelites who made the golden calf grind it up into ash and dust, mix it with water, and drink it. But Jesus says instead that he will be drinking this cup. This shows his death not just as a simple, ordinary Roman execution. It's a declaration of the divine judgment on the sin of the world. So the Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him, and led him to Annas first. He was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of the people. Jesus submits to his arrest by the mob. First, they lead him to Annas to stand trial before the Jews. And Annas is the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was in the position of high priest. But John also reminds us that Caiaphas was one of the saboteurs that was behind the conspiracy to kill Jesus mentioned in John 11. On top of that, Caiaphas had prophesied that Jesus was going to die on behalf of the nation of Israel, and he wanted to prove himself as a true prophet. So needless to say, this is not going to be a fair trial. Simon Peter was following Jesus, and so was another disciple. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and entered with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. Then the slave girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire, for it was cold, and they were warming themselves. And Peter was also with them, standing and warming himself. Peter and another unnamed disciple decide to sneak in and discreetly watch Jesus' trial unfold. Most scholars agree that the unnamed disciple here is John, the author, also known as the beloved disciple who first appeared in John 13. That's mainly because of how Peter and this beloved disciple were paired together back then in John 13, here in this chapter, and will continue to be paired together in John 20 and 21. Now, somewhat mysteriously, this disciple seems to be on good terms with Annas and Caiaphas. His staff allows him to come in to see Jesus' trial and to allow him to let Peter in as well. Now, we should mention that this basically rules out the Lazarus hypothesis, that Lazarus was actually the beloved disciple. We remember from John 11 that Lazarus was known to the high priest, but that's because they were also plotting to kill him as well. Regardless, when they do get in, we see Peter's first failure immediately. There's a young girl operating the gate, and she asks Peter if he was one of Jesus' disciples. Peter, who was just willing to cut off a man's ear for Jesus, he's evidently been completely thrown off by Jesus' complete submission to death. Peter says, "No, I don't follow him," and he flees to warm himself by the fire. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together, and I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those that have heard what I spoke to them. They know what I said." When he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, "Is that the way you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me?" So Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Jesus is being questioned by the priests of the Jews. Jesus stands by every word that he taught, claiming that everything he said was in public with witnesses. There's no secret blasphemy or motive they need to uncover. You can ask any of the witnesses, and if they're truthful, they will confirm everything Jesus has said. Now, one officer believes that this statement is disrespectful to Annas and his office, and he strikes Jesus. But Jesus maintains that if they have any charge or any testimony against him, all they need to do is say it. There's no need for violence. And Annas, frustrated, sends Jesus up the chain of command to Caiaphas. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I'm not." One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear Peter cut off, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. We flip back to Peter and see him deny being a disciple of Jesus 2 more times. One person he tells this to ends up being a relative of Malchus, that servant that Peter cut the ear off of. This person saw him in the garden, saw him attack his relative, and Peter still says, "No, I am not with that guy." And immediately a rooster crows, which fulfills Jesus' words from John 13. The man Peter said he would follow to death is now actually going to his death. But Peter lied about even knowing who he is, and Jesus called it from the beginning. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, and they themselves did not enter into the praetorium, so that they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Therefore Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him to you." So Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves, and judge him according to your law." The Jews said to him, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death," to fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he was about to die. Caiaphas and the Jewish priests turned Jesus over to the Roman governor, Pilate. John mentions how they will not even enter the praetorium, the governor's palace, because it's unclean. It's that associated with putting people to death. Entering an unclean space like that would make them unclean, meaning they wouldn't be able to take part in the Passover. And all this results in some confusion for Pilate as to why they brought Jesus to him at all. He wants to stay out of it completely. He's content to keep living his life as a power-grubbing Roman official. But Caiaphas wants to put Jesus to death so bad that he has to turn him over to Pilate and over to the Romans. That's because they were not allowed to execute the death penalty under Roman occupation. Now, if the Pharisees had snapped and had put Jesus to death then and there, he probably would have been stoned, as was about to happen in John 8. But Jesus said in John 3, 8, and 12 that he would be lifted up in death. That's a euphemism for crucifixion, and that will come about as a result of being handed over to Pilate. Even in the means and the manner of his death, we see that Christ was in control the whole time. Therefore Pilate entered again into the praetorium and summoned Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate answered, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate interrogates Jesus, questioning about his claims to be the king of the Jews. Now, for the Jews of this time, this would be a clear reference to claiming that he was the Messiah. And remember that he was called the King of Israel in John 1 and in John 12. The people wanted to take him and make him a king by force in John 6. But to the Roman governor in charge of Israel, that statement is treasonous. Jesus maintains that he really is a king, But his kingdom is not of this world. It's not a nation or a policy or anything else that will fail or fade over time. His kingdom is the kingdom of heaven, an eternal, everlasting kingdom that is sovereign over all of God's creation. It's the same kingdom that the church is a manifestation of on earth. The Jews that handed him over are not a part of this kingdom, as Jesus has said time and time again, saying that they do not know him or his Father. But everyone who is a part of his kingdom knows the truth about God and knows the truth about his mission for the world. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you wish then that I release for you the King of the Jews?" So they cried out again, saying, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber. Pilate responds to Jesus, "What is truth? Is it even real? Isn't everything subjective? Doesn't true power lie in the place where people believe it lies?" We live in a society and a culture filled with Pilates. It's our default setting. On both sides of the political aisle right now, we are questioning truth, coming up with conspiracy theories, revising history. People today are so desperate for some sort of concrete truth that we've turned to AI language learning models, glorified magic 8 balls for some semblance of reality. And Pilate decides that the only truth is what he personally experiences, believing that Jesus is no different than any other crazy, zealous Jewish religious leader. And yet he still finds no charge in him big enough to actually put him to death. Now, Pilate's personal method of assuaging Jewish outrage was to release one prisoner every year at Passover. And he sees this as a perfect opportunity to ask the crowd if they want Jesus to be released. But instead, the crowd demands Barabbas, whom John calls a robber. Now, Barabbas' name literally means son of the Father. And so what we see is that the people have chosen this cheap imitation over the actual Son of the Father. Now, we will see more of Jesus' trial in the next chapter. But for now, let's focus on how the crowd, the priests, Judas, Pilate, and even Peter have exchanged Jesus for the world. Jesus preached peace and submission. The world demands violence and force. Jesus preached freedom from sin. The world demands freedom to sin. Jesus preached truth and honesty. The world demands lies and denial. Jesus is experiencing, at every turn, all of the evil tendencies of this broken creation. And what's worse is he seems to be attracting it to himself, bearing it on his shoulders, so that in his death, when he drinks the cup, God can punish all of this wickedness. He can refine creation into what it was always meant to be. Being able to accomplish something like that, that's true control. That is true power. Now, for us to experience this, we have to die to ourselves and be taken up into Jesus' resurrection life. But we have to obediently submit to the Father's will, just as Jesus did here. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope that you have a good day, and God bless.